Okay, here we go. Time for part three of our special edition of Sunday with Stan, which is focused on getting ready for the upcoming midterm election. In part one and two, we talked about the economy. In part three, we're going to talk about America's standing on the world stage. President Obama, with respect to his vision of hope and change for America, was to reposition us in a world, in a way that we had better relationships, with people, and somehow the world was going to be a much better, safer, and prosperous place. So, how did he do? Okay, let's start with Libya. A lot of people have forgotten about Libya, but under President Obama's leadership, there was a NATO action that removed the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi from power. Gaddafi, for many years, had been a bad guy, really funded terrorism and had been involved in terrorist acts. But under the George Bush administration, had actually stopped building weapons of mass destruction, or trying to, and had, in a sense, fallen into line with what America wanted. So he certainly wasn't a threat to our country or anyone else any longer. And yet President Obama, one of his first major impacts on the world, was to rid Libya of this leadership. However, there was no plan to replace this leadership. So Libya became a terrorist haven. And right now today, Libya is outsourcer of terrorism. A lot of the weapons that we gave to the resistance in Libya have found their way to other parts of the Middle East, especially Syria. In Syria, you have a civil war that was going on. There, President Assad, who is not considered to be such a great guy, was battling for power against groups that now have weapons that came from America to Libya. And President Obama injected America into that civil war when he said there were things that they could and could not do. I don't know why, and I don't think anyone else knows why he did this, but he did. And he used the term a red line. He drew a red line in the sand, which President Assad allegedly crossed when he allegedly used chemical weapons. We know chemical weapons were used, we just don't really know who used them. But President Obama had said that at that point, we were going to remove him from power, he had to go, and we started to send the American military forces there, via our Navy. And then, inexplicably, Russia intervened, they agreed to give up their weapons, and Assad stayed in power, and America lost something that it hadn't lost in a long time, and that's credibility. The president said he was going to do something and then didn't do it. Now, he does that all the time with respect to domestic policy, but in the world, the broader world, this is a disaster because people need to believe that the most powerful man in the world is going to do what he says he's going to do. All right, so in the Middle East region, we have a disaster in Libya, really caused by President Obama involving us in Libya. We have an ongoing disaster in Syria. We have a bigger country there that's now part of this Syria disaster, and it's Iraq. We had gone to war with Iraq. We had won that war. Personally, I was against that war for many reasons I'm not going to go into now, but that was a war that had been won. It had cost many American lives and lots of American money. All we needed to do was to leave a residual force to keep the peace. President Obama didn't want to do that. They'll make excuses now saying, oh, well, the Iraqis didn't want it. That is not true. Okay, we all know that. That's rewriting history. President Obama made them a deal that they could not do. He made our military a deal that our military couldn't do. So we left no troops in Iraq, and it fell apart. And between Iraq and Syria, falling apart, it gave birth to IS. I've spoken about this in the past. IS is a terrorist army. It is an existential threat to the world, especially us. They've promised to come here and to, in a sense, rid our contribution to the world, which is being infidels. So now we are somewhat back involved in a war we had already won in Iraq and Syria. So President Obama's accomplishment there is disastrous. While the turmoil has been going on in Libya, Iraq, and Syria, our closest ally in the region, and maybe our closest ally period, Israel, found itself at war with an area called Gaza. I don't want to call it a state, but it's a little terrorist state run by a terrorist organization known as Hamas. Israel has a very powerful army and a very good leader in Benjamin Netanyahu. In the middle of protecting Israel from thousands of rockets that were being launched by Hamas, President Obama, instead of backing our ally, decided to call for restraint. And I mean, think about that. In the middle of a war. And not only did he call for restraint, he decided to stop shipping the weapons that Israel needs to fight this terrorist army known as Hamas, which is like IS, but an earlier version. And to that end, we betrayed our closest ally and emboldened the terrorist organization Hamas. Okay, so I don't think we could call that a success or a way that we want the world to view our actions. So then we have a couple other situations going on in the Middle East that should be looked at very closely. Iran. Whilst all the fighting is going on in Israel, in Iraq, and Syria, and Libya has turned into this chaotic place, which I'm not going to go into in any detail right now, but most of us have heard the term the Benghazi incident, where our ambassador was murdered and people were going to be held to account. No one's been held to account. Okay, but Iran has been pursuing a nuclear program which President Obama assured us would be stopped. We had sanctions that were working maybe a little bit or hurting the Iranian economy. I always thought that that wasn't going to work. The leader of Iran, the religious leader of Iran, has told us that he's not going to give up this program. So they're negotiating and they're continuing their program. And at this rate, the terrorist Islamic State of Iran will have a nuclear weapon. So that's the Middle East. When you take a little trip up the globe, you get to Europe. Besides the fact our relationships are not better with our allies in Europe, and they're not anywhere near as good as they were when President Bush was president. But we have this huge thing going on with Russia. Russia, who Hillary Clinton literally brought a reset button to, misinterpreted that to think that the reset was back to the days of the Soviet Union. And why that's a joke? It's no joke. Russia took back Crimea, almost without firing a shot, and the United States could do nothing because we are now weak, intentionally weak at the president's vision at what the American president should be in the world. So Russia took back Crimea from Ukraine, and now has begun the process of taking back parts of Ukraine as a whole. You can't blame President Putin for this, the president of Russia. He's a strong leader with a strong vision. He's been very clear throughout his career that the fall of the Soviet Union, in his mind, was a tragedy. He's doing what he thinks is best for Russia. The problem is, what's best for Russia isn't necessarily best for America. And President Obama has put us in a position in the world where, by weakening America, he's given rise to other powers, past powers like Russia and new powers like IS. these aren't necessarily powers that have our values. In the case of IS, it's a death cult like Nazi Germany. And it is a threat to the world and America. So, and it's funny, I'm going to take one little more jaunt around the globe. North Korea. I don't even need to say more. North Korea, besides having nuclear weapons, which President Clinton allowed to happen, now has intercontinental ballistic missile that can carry a nuke to America. So President Obama's view of the world and the reduction of American power and influence, how has that gone with respect to hope and change? Well, America was supposed to be the place where people had hope, where people came to who needed hope. They want to be free, to have a life and liberty and a pursuit of happiness. That is not what he has brought to the world through American power or the reduction of American power. As far as change goes, the borders we once knew just 6 years ago have indeed changed. And unfortunately, before the next 2 years have gone by, will keep changing. So before you go and vote in the midterm election, remember what I said in part 1 and part 2. Our economy is not doing better. It's a fraud. And our presence in the world and our influence on the world is not doing better. It isn't making the world a better place. We've withdrawn from the world, and forces of evil have risen that now will have to be dealt with. Remember that when you go to vote. We don't have to keep going down this path. We can say stop. We've seen hope and change, President Obama, and it's not working out. We want to go down a different path. So here's a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. We want you in the last 2 years to work with them and give us a vision that includes prosperity here at home and strength and leadership in the world abroad. So that's it for our special edition of Sundays with Stan, the election edition. And I will see you next Sunday for our regular show. So I'll see you Sunday.